All right, Jason, we're going beyond the blog again this week, and we are talking about stubborn customers. It's not always, that the customers are stubborn, but a lot of times, there is this tug of war that takes place between the MSP and the customers, and really just getting them to try to adhere to best practices. So give me your thoughts on this topic, and what's the first thing that comes to mind when you think about it?
Yeah. So, what to do when clients won't take your advice? Well, first of all, I'm surprised that, clients wouldn't take your sage advice. But for the foolish few, um, this is something that's probably more acute to you than me, although it's lamented through our partner base to some degree. I think you hit on all the high points in the article, in terms of maybe starting off, for example, what was remarkable to me was the self-assessment, to kind of look inward and say, well, how have I breached the subject? I guess pun intended there. How have I brought the subject up? What's the discussion been like? Look at yourself first. Maybe even the notion of a second voice, a partner or co-owner, something of that nature, to kind of deliver the message maybe differently. That's one thing I can relate to. Going back in my cybersecurity sales days was, occasionally I talked to a guy like yourself, and I seemed like I had all the best value propositions, but it just wasn't working the way that it came out of my mouth and my voice. And occasionally I would have a second voice for the same end, to the same end.
Yeah. And I think that if you're not getting your client to the point where they're asking questions, then you're probably not doing I relate this to a situation I had recently at the car, at the mechanic basically.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I feel like at the mechanic, you kind of do this thing where you don't want to come off like you don't know what you're talking about. So you just kind of nod your head and you're like, yeah, okay. But then you leave and you're like, wait, I have no idea what I just agreed to. I don't know how severe these issues are that they just described. I don't know how much it's going to cost me. And so what I think one thing that is becoming common in that industry that is useful is now you get this report and they put these color codes on stuff, and if it's red, you got to get it fixed now. And if it's yellow, it's okay, well, maybe we can address that later. But I do know there's a lot of that goes on in the SMB world with cybersecurity and just technology in general, where maybe they are just giving you the head nod, but they're not actually they don't really know what's going on. They don't know the impact.
Yeah.
They don't know how, the short-term cost versus the long-term cost, and that kind of thing.
Wouldn't that be a powerful way to present your data with some sort of schematic of a stack in red, yellow, green? That's a really good analogy, and you bridging that to the automotive or the mechanic, especially when you talk about that need to feel like we're providing feedback, or that we understand what the individual is talking about, so we don't come off as unintelligent or uninformed, or that they would take advantage of us. And when you're saying that, I pictured in my head sitting down, with the client or prospect and doing the same thing a mechanic does, is to start listing all these, services and kind of add-ons. And hey, if they don't say anything, then I guess that, that means maybe they'll entertain this.
Right.
Probably not. Probably doesn't stick like it does in the world of the mechanic, but you bring up an interesting parallel.
And not to keep going back to that and the analogy, but actually I was in this shop, and they had this poster on the wall, and it was really cool because it had prices, but for short-term repairs versus long-term impact repairs. So the cost of replacing brake pads versus the cost of replacing drums and rotors and the whole thing, the cost of doing the maintenance versus the cost of replacing an engine. So it was really cool because they showed you, okay, if you don't just spend this $100 now, here's what you're going to eventually spend no matter what. And it was really awesome. It was presented in a very easy way, and it was presented while I was sitting there waiting for my car. That's a really perfect
cool.
time.
Really cool. It's reminds me of Benjamin Franklin saying, "An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure." But it's funny that the analogy keeps working for the automobile industry. Who knew that they were the beacon? But that's another great, technique. And I wonder though about when we talk about trying to identify the root of the problem, the root of the no, the root of the hesitation. Could we keep the car analogy and possibly you're trying to sell me preventative maintenance in my automobile, but I've never broken down on the side of the road. I've never been unable to stop and rear-ended somebody. Why do I need all this stuff? And you can see the natural parallel to that security questions being the same. I've never been breached.
Yeah. And that's the thing is like, it's not always, and that's what I'm trying to get at, is it's not always about cost. It's not, sometimes it's just priority. And it's like, it doesn't even require time and effort. It just requires them to say, okay, this is a problem now that is worth addressing. I'm willing to go forward with it. And sometimes that thing that gets them over that hump is just information. Like they're just now in a more comfortable place to say yes, or it's become more urgent, or, there's a lot that goes into that. So yeah, it's just a very interesting thing because I personally, we've struggled with it as an MSP. It's like one of the things that I feel like is, and I said in the article, it's like the most frustrating thing. And, you would think that there's easy solutions out there, QBRs, and there's all these platforms that exist where you can, manage your best practices. But it doesn't always get to the yes, which is really what you need, right? It's like that simple yes. It's one word, 3 letters.
Right. And for all the effort and all the platforms and an effort that you would put in for that simple yes. So, another thing that stuck out was the leveraging data and customer advocates. And I think you made a legal, you drew a parallel to the legal. Well, I can tell you as a security vendor, we do the same thing, and legal resonated with me because we're a sponsor of the American Bar Association, for example. So we're going to put ourselves in that position. And I think it's similar to the example that you used in the MSP world. If you're trying to close a law firm, wouldn't it be kind of common sense, or am I taking for granted that it's too commonsensical to grab a legal referral, or sometimes it's not that easy?
Yeah. And and we've never, I've never gone to a customer and say, hey, can you talk to this customer and sell my services for me? That's not really what I mean by customer
Right.
advocate, although it would be nice. But, like, I think that even just being able to say, hey, listen, you're at a certain point of maturity and size, and your organization really needs this. Most, you could even name drop their competitors and find out like what are they using these solutions, like where do you fit in, and where do you want your business to go. And you could just take a look around the room at American Bar Association meeting and have encourage them to have those conversations on their own, talk to their lawyer friends, and figure out like, are they paying for these solutions? Because I think honestly, if they were to ask around and maybe have a few conversations about it with people that are like totally outside of this circle between like you and the customer, they might find out that, yeah, it's pretty common, and it might be enough to change their mind.
Well, with a company like us, we like to try to act as a conduit into those verticals by helping MSPs with that content and the vertical content, for them to be able to either break into it, if that reference isn't at hand. Seems like it's a lot easier than by proxy to kind of say, if, for example, just taking ourselves, if I'm a VIPRE preferred partner, and if VIPRE is a proud sponsor of the American Bar Association, and then doesn't it make sense that you, Mr. Prospect, maybe would listen to me or give me a little bit more lend me your ear, if you will.
Yeah, that's a good point, because VIPRE wouldn't just put their, associate their brand with the American Bar Association if lawyers didn't need security products, right? And it would be silly for you to do that.
Not only that, but if we didn't understand the specific challenges that lawyers face in the cybersecurity arena, it's particularly what, obviously compliance, and everything that involves the privacy data.
So does VIPRE, do you ever get involved in the sales engineering side, like to that degree? Can you talk me through that process a little bit for you guys?
Well, the sales engineers at VIPRE are an extension of our sales team, and our MSPs are an extension of our sales team. and our MSPs get the access to the sales engineers in the same way for the same reason. So we're just a believer in that kind of enablement in our partner program. And it's as helpful to the MSP as it is to any salesperson to be able to, a football analogy, to take the ball, down the field, kind of get it into that red zone area where it's going to get a little bit more technical and probably a little more vendor feature benefit centric. Why not call in the heavies, little reinforcements, and utilize the vendor's SE at that point?
Do you find that really does help, take it from inside the red zone, like in?
Yeah,
Is that
because
like
the
a big
specialists,
difference maker?
Kevin, because if it's with the football analogy, the SEs are that skilled receiver, that big tight end that's going to get open in the red zone. That's what he does. He's put in, the
And
coach
then do
runs
the
them in
Gronk
there
spike.
for the end zone, right? Like the Gronk spike. Thank you very much for that Tampa Bay reference. But yeah, that works. And there's other tools too. How about a joint webinar with one of our sales engineers? So there's a lot of different ways to kind of team up, I think.
That's a great point. I think if you think that you've had enough conversations, then it's worth having even more. Like, I think you probably haven't had as many touches on this as you think. And that persistence is probably like, you need to get to a no. If they've never said no, then you need to keep going. You know what I mean? Because like, you can't just assume that someone doesn't want something. Maybe they rejected something one time or at some point, and you can never just assume that someone, because then you're not doing your due diligence as an MSP. And obviously, like, it needs to be either a yes or a no, and really nothing else in that context is quite clear.
Well, do you know what's great about a no? It's definitive, and it gives me
Right.
some place to start.
Yeah, right. That's a great point. It's a starting point.
Yeah, you've made a decision. Finally, you're off the fence. You're not just telling me maybe. You're not just putting me off. Call me in 3 weeks. You finally said no. Now I can start.
Right. Yeah, and if they don't say no, it's hard, or yes, it's hard to say where the liability
That's right.
is.
That's right.
If there is some sort of event that takes place. Because if you're just playing ping pong and the ball's still in the air, if let's say something does happen, it's like, okay, well, we were just sort of in the middle of this. We weren't, we had not yet to come to a conclusion. So really, whose fault is it?
Yeah. Yeah, and when you get that no, you've only gotten a no for probably one technique or a limited handful of techniques and acts and some of the advice that we've given. In my head, I watch a lot of documentaries and Discovery and Smithsonian Channel, things like that. I remember the big World War II generals that would be around these vast tables with the largest maps you've ever seen. And there's all these different strategies going on all over the place on these maps. And I liken it to our example because you've only gotten a no in that one strategy here. We tried the pincher technique here, didn't work. It's a no. We're going to try all this other stuff over here. Then we're going to try this, and then we're going to try that. I think the analogy works because that's really what I've been trying to pick up on with you is that a no is only a no in a very, I think, narrow scope.
Yeah. You're right. And, I think that's the balance of best practice too, is like MSPs really can benefit from standardization and this and that. But then when you've boiled it down to just a bunch of check boxes, then that strategy kind of becomes fuzzy. It's like, we recommend this is what we offer. If you don't want it, then you're essentially saying like, you don't want our services. Like it has to be, you have to get to a point where you get your clients to a point where either they're all in or they're not. And that kind of like leads us into the final thing here, which is like knowing when to just kind of walk away.
Right.
And so, this happened to us several times. It wasn't always because of like a failed recommendation or something like that. It just happens. It doesn't happen a lot in managed services. That's one of the great things about the industry is that like you can retain clients forever. But it does happen. We've always approached it in a way that it's like never burn the bridge. It's important to have some kind of like good handoff to, because obviously this person's going to need someone to help them. So you need to make sure that whether they're coming in or out, transitions are always clean and they're always cordial, and that they're obviously like left with nothing but fond memories, right?
Right.
And
Now, Kevin, did you walk away from all their business, or just that this kind of the security aspect of their business?
normally it was everything, and
Yeah, and
that's
that's what I expected to
also,
hear.
yeah, that's the challenge with doing the sort of all or nothing MSP scope, is that like it really does turn
Mhm.
into a point where you might need to keep going up the stack, and if they start to push back, um, it's more of a liability to be halfway in,
That's it.
offload.
That's how I see it too. It's we can shake hands and be friends. It's just a liability issue. It occurred to me as we're talking that kind of like a bodyguard. What if you expected somebody to be your bodyguard, but you wouldn't let them carry a gun, you wouldn't let them, kind of do target practice, hand-to-hand combat training to keep their perishable skills sharp, but you expected them to protect you in hostile environments or hostile crowds. So again, it's another analogy that maybe it's kind of the same thing. Well, if you're going to take away what I'm telling you you need for the security aspects, to keep your business tucked in and safe, I'm unable to do my job. And, from the liability perspective, we'll have to shake hands and be friends and walk away.